Good evening, dear participants. Good morning, Opeyemi. You are from London. Everybody, we welcome you to the EDB's 16th webinar on facilitating digital trade and micro and small medium enterprises participation. This is an overview of Sri Lanka's readiness assessment. The EDB recognized the e-commerce is one of the key areas to be developed, especially for the benefits of the SMEs to reach the global markets. So for that, the EDB conducted e-commerce readiness assessment of Sri Lanka with the support of the Commonwealth Secretariat. Thanks for the willingly participation of the Commonwealth to do this readiness assessment. Today we have this for the seminar, Ms. Opeyemi Abebe as a resource person who is the project leader of the e-commerce readiness assessment of Sri Lanka, which is implemented by the EDB under the assistance of Commonwealth Secretariat. And she led to prepare the e-commerce readiness report, recommending a strategic plan for e-commerce development and systemic actions that must be taken to unlock the considerable potential for e-commerce in Sri Lanka. Let me to give a brief introduction to Ms. Opeyemi. She is the head of the Trade Competitiveness Section of the Commonwealth Secretariat, where she led a team of trade advisors to provide technical assistance to member countries of the Commonwealth on trade competitiveness issues. She worked as the Trade Commissioner with the Canadian Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and International Development. And Opeyemi has years of experience on USAID-funded projects, Nigerian export expansion program focused on building the export capacity of SMEs. She's the consultant on gender issues of the UNDP and the Nigerian Constitutional Reviews Committee, and as a consultant to the World Bank and USAID funded economic development projects. And let me to give her educational background very briefly. She holds a master's degree in international trade and investment law from the University of Western Cape. And she is the bachelor degree from the Lagos State University. So it is your time, Ms. Opeyemi, to give the presentation to the participants. And before that, I invite our participants to join with us with our Q&A session. And you can this time the participant can use both the live chat and Q&A sessions at the bottom of your screen. So it is over to you, Opeyemi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Indrakit. Good evening to everybody in Colombo. Just like you said, we are in the morning here in London, and our day is starting while your day is gradually winding down. It's my pleasure to join the EDB today to discuss the opportunities that exist in Colombo, in Sri Lanka, for MSMEs who want to engage in digital trade. Just like we all know, the reality of the world that we live in now is that it is only those who are able to reform their business processes and to inculcate innovation in the way that they do business that the future trade landscape would favor. Increasingly, the traditional ways of doing business, it's changing, and Now we are in a world of super fast cyber trade, and any MSME who wants to ensure their survival and ensure that they survive beyond the current times, I mean, even with the pandemic, or even survive into the future, would have to inculcate and innovate and take on board learn digital skills that can enable them to participate more effectively in the international trade, even in the domestic market. If MSMEs don't innovate, they run the risk of being run out of the business by the big e-commerce companies who are now selling everything that our traditional MSMEs are trading in. So it's my pleasure to join everybody. I greet you and salute you and thank the EDB for giving me this opportunity to share your evening with you on this webinar. So essentially, the webinar today will be structured around my presentation of the report that we prepared for Sri Lanka. So a few years ago, about 2018, we were approached, the Commonwealth Secretariat was approached by the EDB to help assess the readiness of Sri Lanka and Sri Lankan MSMEs to take on digital trade and to assess the e-commerce opportunities that exist and how Sri Lanka can improve and expand its market share in the digital landscape, in the digital trade landscape. This was a project that was interesting for us in the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the previous chairperson of the EDB, Ms. Indira Melwate, had led that project before she left, and the new chairperson also offered his support, and we brought that project to a conclusion in December last year, and that report has been printed and submitted to the government of Sri Lanka in March. There is an opportunity for us to present that report to a broader spectrum of stakeholders, and then to identify what needs to be done. So it's not just enough to do a report, which is what sometimes development partners do. We do a report, it is submitted, and then that's the end of it. But it's about what are the recommendations within that report that we can implement, that the Secretariat can support, that the EDB can support, that the various government agencies within Sri Lanka can support to ensure that we go from just a narrative in a report to actualization of the opportunities that exist in Sri Lanka, especially for our small and micro businesses. So I'm going to be sharing my screen while I make this presentation. And like Mr. Indra Kitri said, I had asked that for this session, participants should be encouraged to use the chat function. At one or two points in the course of the presentation, I would throw questions at participants. I encourage you to respond in the chat using the chat function. We have a question and answer function. We can also put your questions in the Q&A section, but we would also take some responses through chat. And everybody is encouraged to participate using the chat function so that we can make this conversation interactive and we can learn from one another. I will share my screen now as I make the presentation of the e-Readiness assessment report that we prepared for Sri Lanka. So let me go to share my screen. Okay. And share. And okay, perfect. I believe that everyone can now see the presentation that I am sharing. And Mr. Indrakit, we're all good? Perfect. Okay, so this section, this webinar is focused on digital trade, like we all know, MSME participation, and we will do an overview of Sri Lanka's e-Readiness assessment. After this, we would have opportunities for a Q&A section where we would discuss some of the more topical issues. I've already pre-received some questions on COVID and what we can do. And so we will take some of those questions as we go on. So when it comes to e-commerce, for any country or for any country to increase their share of e-commerce, the development that is required to make that increase happen is multidimensional. It has to happen at the national level, at the level of the government. It has to happen at the level of the business themselves. It also has to happen at the level of the consumers. And it has to happen at a multidimensional level. Each of these components of e-commerce needs to develop for us to achieve an optimization of the opportunities that e-commerce presents for the MSMEs in Sri Lanka. So this is the whole concept behind this report. How can we find a way to improve the various components that interact in the e-commerce ecosystem to ensure that we optimize the opportunities MSMEs in Sri Lanka? It is not something that government alone can do. It's not something the businesses themselves alone can do. So it's an interaction of what everybody can do. And this is the foundation of the Sri Lanka's e-Readiness assessment report. Now, who are the major players in e-commerce? We have the government, who are the policy makers and the regulators. So they make the policies, they regulate the policies. We have the suppliers. We have the people who are the producers, those are the suppliers. We have the e-commerce players, because sometimes the suppliers themselves don't necessarily trade in the digital landscape their own product. So sometimes you have intermediaries who sell the product of other suppliers. We have the buyers, and then we have the various e-commerce channels. Now, enabling this framework would need ICT and internet service providers. We need the financial intermediaries, the banks, and the organizations that provide any sort of financial services. We need the logistics companies to play their part. They are the enablers. We need the network service providers. We need the network, social networking site, your Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is. All of those social networking sites are starting to play an important role in facilitating and enabling e-commerce. And then we also have the call centers. So the government stands on one side, the key players are on top, but the people who enable this to happen are the people that we refer to as the enablers. Now, basically, there are various types of e-commerce models, and I'm sure that a number of us have come across this conversation before. We have the B2B, which is when businesses sell to other businesses. It is the biggest and the largest component share of e-commerce so far globally. We have the business to consumers, where businesses sell directly to consumers. We have the consumer to consumers. This is when consumers sell things to themselves. So sometimes you use something, you don't need it anymore, or you buy something, you don't need it anymore. You can put it on a platform and sell it to somebody else. That is what we refer to as consumer to consumer. You're not a business, you're just an individual selling something to another person. We also can have government to business, which we call the G2B. And this is when a company is paying for government fees or goods or services online. In this instance, government is the one who is selling the service to businesses. We also have business to government, and obviously this is when businesses act as suppliers to government. So the government buys directly from a business using an online portal. And we also have government to consumer e-commerce. And this is where consumers or people like you and me pay for government services using an online portal in the place of going to the bank and doing a bank transaction. So when you pay your fees, you pay your licensing fee, you pay your registration fee online, that is the government selling a service to you as a consumer. Now, how does e-commerce transaction flow? A number of us, again, are familiar with this, so all these are just foundational things. I'm going to run through them. First off, it always starts with information. You have something to sell, you must put the information about that product or service somewhere. That information, whether it is a description of your goods or services, is placed on an e-commerce platform. You are the supplier. Now, even if you put the picture of your product on an e-commerce platform, that's an information that you are putting in the front of the public. Now, that information then goes to the buyer. The buyer sees the information, is keen to take up the opportunities that you're presenting through that information, sends money to you using the banks or financial platform or payment, whatever payment gateway. That money goes back to the supplier. The supplier sends the product, the good or services using the logistics infrastructure back to the buyer. So this basically is a chart that just represents how all of transactions flow within e-commerce. All of this is critical for us to understand why the key players for e-commerce are. Again, the key players major players in e-commerce ecosystem, the suppliers, the buyers, the transporters, the banks, the service providers, and government. I'm not going to waste time on this. So my first question is, why e-commerce? Why we think e-commerce is important? Because everybody now is talking about digital trade. The whole world's gone digital. It's the reality of the life that we live now. We have kids who don't know anything, but know how to operate a gadget. They are still under 3 years old. They probably don't know enough about maths and English, but they know exactly how they can find the information they need on a gadget to watch a movie or to watch a show that is of interest to them. It's the reality that we face. And increasingly, as the world continues to go on, we would find that the traditional means of doing business is going to be impacted further and further. And now everybody would get on into the digital trade bandwagon. E-commerce allows you to expand your market reach. It gives you a global reach. It enables you to sell your goods to people who are not in your immediate vicinity, which is what a traditional market would do. You can develop your product or service to fit a particular niche in the market. So you identify what the consumers want, and then you tailor-make your product or your service to fit that need. That is also something that e-commerce can help you to do. It reduces transaction time because I don't need to go to the market or to the stores and walk around the aisle. I can sit on my computer and pick everything that I want and have them delivered to me. It reduces the cost of transaction for the business players. It increases profitability for the firms because they are able to increase their sales. It is very convenient for consumers and absolutely reduces overhead costs. So somebody can sit in their home and participate and sell and build on a website or a platform without having to set up an office and set up a shop and have a lot of back-end support for their business. So my first question that I'm going to ask participants to put in the chart is, why, again, what are the other advantages that you see for e-commerce? What are the other things that you believe are the advantages of digital trade? You can put in your response in the chat function, and we will take a look at that as we go on. So my next slide is why e-commerce. Participants respond. So please go into the chat function and type in why you think e-commerce is important. Or if you think e-commerce is not important, tell us why you think e-commerce is not important. I'd like to see your responses in the chat function. Okay. We've talked about the business models in e-commerce, B2C, C2C, B2B. These are the three ones we focused on in the report. And again, talked about the fact that there's been a phenomenal growth in the online sales of goods and services over the last 10 years. B2B alone is estimated at $30 trillion and B2C at over $2 trillion. Now, the largest market, of course, is China, and it is growing exponentially. But the interesting thing is that other fast-growing markets are emerging in Asia, in Latin America, and in Africa. So we have China, India, Brazil. The leaders of e-commerce truly are big developed countries. So the US, EU, and all of the big developed countries. China is right at the top with them, but we're starting to see an increase in the uptake of digital trade in Asia. And this is something that should be of interest to you in Sri Lanka. So just a basic graph to show how B2C, that is business to consumer e-commerce, is growing, because this is where a lot of our MSMEs pay. We want to sell directly to consumers. And I just use an example of what is happening in India, just so that you can see how the market share in India is growing at an exponential level, and they are your regional neighbors. So when we talked about the areas of focus for developing e-commerce in Sri Lanka, in the report, we looked at how we can develop awareness and skills, because we recognize that the awareness is still at a very low level. How we can develop e-business models and strategies as businesses. We looked at the ICT ecosystem within Sri Lanka. We looked at the laws, policies, and the regulations, the logistics and delivery, and the e-payment modalities, because these are the critical areas that we would need to focus on if we want to grow e-commerce digital trade trends in Sri Lanka. And then again, the cross-cutting areas of intervention, like I previously mentioned, the reliable ICT and internet infrastructure management and governance by all the government agencies, and I dare say, by the organized private sector. So your chambers of commerce, they all have a role to play in developing e-commerce in Sri Lanka. Now, I understand, because I had asked, a number of the people who are on this webinar are MSMEs. So I thought to include this slide to help you as an MSME identify where you are when it comes to e-commerce. How can you assess yourself as a company? Basically, this is what this slide tries to show. You are an entrepreneur. You are a small business. How we will rate your maturity as a small business. Now, if there's nowhere where your product product descriptions are available, so nobody can find any information about what you sell, whether it is a good or service. You do not have any customer data. You don't know who is buying your product. You just sell to anybody. You don't have any store online front. You have no back office where somebody else is collating the orders. You only deal in cash, and you don't have opportunity, or you have no logistics plan in place. Orders in your shops are collected in person only. Then your maturity is still at level 0. Now, if you are an MSME and you have minimal description of your product somewhere, but they don't have any pictures, maybe you placed an ad in some of the ad portals, you have a small limited number of customer data information that you can use to manage marketing. You have a website, but your website is not e-commerce enabled. Customers can read about your product, then they have to place an order either by email or using a phone. You have small and limited back office function, somebody who is responding to emails or taking customer inquiries. Your card facility is available, but only at point of sale, and people can pick up the goods or have it delivered at their doorstep. Our maturity assessment for your business would be at a 1. Now, if on the other hand, as a small business, you have a comprehensive description of your product with all of the pictures, nice quality pictures, optimized for online purchase. You have a data set. You know who your customers are. You know how you can increase your customer base. The website is e-commerce enabled. That means people can buy directly from your website. You have a back office that can fulfill the orders that people are placing on your website. You can pay for your product or service over the phone or at the point of payment, or you can even use PayPal to pay, and you have a semi-integrated logistics with an ability to issue return labels or bulk book for collection. Then your maturity assessment would be at level 2. Now, if you're an MSME, a participant in this webinar, and you have a comprehensive product description, the pictures are there, the product product reviews are there, so your previous customers have gone on your website and said, oh, I bought this tea from XYZ company, it is one of the best teas I've ever had, or I bought this ceramic flower vase, it's durable, it's beautiful. You have customer review. You are looking at your customer data regularly and analyzing it. You are using that information you are collecting from who is buying from you to modify your goods and services. Your website is enabled. People can download your app. They can make mobile purchases using your website. You have a fully digital back office. You have a system for dispute resolution and returns. So a customer bought something from you, they change their mind. There's a system in place for the customer to return those goods, get their money back, or you have a process where you can return. You can exchange the product for the customer, and you have a fully integrated logistics service, including drop shipping capacities using all the logistics service provider. Then your assessment is at level 3. This for us is a way that you as an MSME can assess your own maturity in order to enable you take advantage of the digital trade landscape. Now, when we developed the e-readiness assessment for Sri Lanka, like I said, we wanted to focus on certain parameters. What are the things that need to be in place for digital trade to be developed in Sri Lanka? One, we developed 5 parameters. The first thing is consumers. The citizens of Sri Lanka themselves must be e-ready. We must grow a population of people who know how to buy things online and who have the ability and capacity to make those purchases of goods or services using a digital platform. So consumer readiness is critical. Businesses must be ready. The MSMEs yourselves, you need skills and development to enable you to deliver to your consumers what they purchase from you using an online platform. The IT and infrastructure is available, must be available, and it's not just about the availability of the IT infrastructure, but the accessibility. So it's not that there is bandwidth everywhere in Sri Lanka. It's about who can access it. How cheap is it? How expensive is it? Can somebody who is not in Colombo easily afford the broadband they require for their business? What is the system of logistics and delivery in place? And what are the laws, the policies, and the regulations that are necessary to facilitate the digital trade landscape in Sri Lanka? These were the parameters that we set for ourselves when we measured the e-readiness of Sri Lanka. Now, when we set the parameters, we then also set indicators. So what did we need to measure to help us know how ready these segments of the parameters are? So when we measured the readiness of consumers in Sri Lanka, we wanted to see how many consumers are purchasing things online. Of course, you know that this is a sterilized data. That means that we did not do a survey of all the consumers in Sri Lanka. We took a sample of people, okay, and then used that sample to make our data set analysis. So then we also looked at the percentage of the consumers that are aware and skilled in online purchasing. We then looked at the percentage of consumers that are using computers or internet. We looked at the percentage of the citizens that use mobile phones and the percentage of the population that have access to a credit or debit card or can use other electronic means of payment. These were the indicators we set to measure how ready the Sri Lankan consumers are. When we came to business readiness, we wanted to look at the proportion of firms that are adopting IT systems. Again, we did a survey of a number of firms in Sri Lanka working with the EDB to get the statistics and the raw data to us. We wanted to look at the number of firms that have IT skilled staff, because that is also critical to how quickly the company or the MSME can deploy e-commerce. We looked at the number of firms that are themselves buying things online. So the input into your product, how are you buying and how are you sourcing them? We looked at the percentage of firms that are selling online. We looked at the percentage of firms that have a website or web presence. And we also looked at the percentage of firms that are using electronic payment. When it came to IT infrastructure and accessibility, we looked at the percentage of the population in Sri Lanka that has internet access. We also looked at the population with mobile access, because mobile access most of the time goes with internet access. And we looked at the number of firms that are happy with the level of security and the service that they are receiving from the IT infrastructure service providers. And then we also looked generally at the availability of the IT infrastructure across Sri Lanka itself. When it came to logistics and delivery, again, we looked at the percentage of transport and logistic firms with IT systems, the percentage of the population on developed air or transport infrastructure, the percentage of the logistics firm with integrated warehousing and transport system, and the proportion of the population of the percentage of population with home delivery service from the courier services companies. And finally, we looked at the laws and regulation. We looked at the proportion of IT, trade, and taxation policies aligned with e-commerce needs, the proportion of ICT, commercial, civil, and other laws aligned with e-commerce, and the proportion of regulations that are aligned with e-commerce. So I'm going to move fast because we need to wrap this up in good time. Now, when we look at e-commerce adoption and the diffusion of e-commerce, one of the things that we think would enable Sri Lanka as a country to leapfrog in the development of digital trade and e-commerce expansion is the population of the young people who are educated. The more we find that where you have a large portion of educated young people, they are quickly able to jump into the digital trade landscape. They are better able to understand it. That is not to say that our old people are not able to. We're only saying that the young people have a capacity to jump on board that bandwagon a bit quicker. But they are your early adopters. We also have companies that are matured, but that are led by young people. In the Commonwealth as an organization, we do believe very much in the power of the young people. And so you would see that a lot of our projects are skewed around young people, because we know that young people are not just the leaders of tomorrow. I dare say that they are the leaders of today. So we encourage young people to be early adopters. When a young person is leading a matured company, you would see a high level of innovation. Young people are able to take risk. They are more able to quickly make those innovations and adaptations that are necessary to fast track. There is a government action to promote innovation and technology diffusion, and then there is worker skills by assisting the businesses to acquire the knowledge and skills they need, by setting up incubation services for early startups. And I'm happy that the government of Sri Lanka does that quite a bit. You have a few incubation facilities for small businesses. I know the EDB, the postal services, have some of those facilities that they put in place to enable MSMEs to take advantage or to jump feet first into the digital trade bandwagon. Then they need the financial and technical assistance to facilitate adaptation by the businesses. This is what government can do. And then, of course, government can also help spread the word around the ideas of e-commerce among businesses. We can use e-commerce to promote the national brand of Sri Lanka. And that is something that we thought was interesting, so that we can move very quickly from just going from selling commodities to value-added product, from selling bulk packed grains, packaging it as the market requires, from selling in bulk without a name, branded as made in Sri Lanka, and not knowing who your consumers are, coming to a place where your consumers become the driving force of what it is that you are promoting. So how can we assess the digital readiness of the citizens in e-commerce for e-commerce maturity? I already talked about it. We talked about the consumer, their awareness, how we can encourage consumers to buy things online, how we can expand the coverage of mobile phones, how we can encourage uptake of computers and internet, and how we can encourage consumers to use to have more. And this is not even with the consumers, but this is something the consumers and the banks and the financial services providers need to work on together to have more people become banked, because a number of people still do not have bank accounts, as we find out. So when it comes to logistics and delivery, what are the major considerations? How much will it cost to send a shipment even from Colombo to another part of Sri Lanka, or to Myanmar or India, or to one of your regional partners. Because e-commerce is a highly competitive business, if your logistics cost is more expensive than the logistic cost of your neighbors or your regional partners, then your businesses would not be profitable. When it comes to logistics, fast delivery is essential. How quickly can your customer place an order and receive that order within a few days, or is it going to be within 2-3 weeks before they get what they want? Accurate locational delivery using GPS or whatever standard, the postal service, and how they are enablers of this process, and how we can increase automation and integration. Now, this is just a model for e-commerce logistics and the supply chain when it comes to logistics. The first mile, the fulfillment, the last mile delivery to the consumer, and return to the vendor if necessary. Then when it comes to e-payment enabling factors, we looked at how we can expand credit and debit card usage. Okay, I find I've been in Sri Lanka where I wanted to pay for something with my debit card and credit card, and unfortunately the merchant would not accept my payment, even in store. In the store, they wanted me to pay, they preferred for me to pay with cash, simply because the merchant said that if I paid with my card, then that payment would be taxed, and that was not beneficial for them. And that is something that we would need to look at as a whole, as a group of stakeholders. What and how are the financial institutions able to extend grants to MSMEs or credit to MSMEs, as the case may be? How can we develop alternative e-payment like mobile money or mobile money storage instruments, where people can save some money on a wallet online and then use that money to buy? So they transfer it into a mobile wallet and then use that wallet to do transactions. This is something that is taking place all over the developing countries, and this is something that is also starting to gain ground in Sri Lanka through the the telecommunications companies. The back-end system development, payment gateways, interbank payment modalities. If I pay using a card from bank A, how quickly is that transmitted to my bank? And of course, to promote the usage of POS with the merchants in Sri Lanka. The IT infrastructure and system, again, the critical things that we want to see is reliable and secure internet service. We want to see an expansion of mobile coverage. We want to see the diffusion of IT at firm level, at MSME level. We want to see the integration of systems across the country between government portals and business portals. We want to see standards set for exchange of data. Security is very critical, and authentication, and of course the e-payment bank system. Now, one thing I just touched on, which is very critical, that we would need to work on, is the security of information. One of the reasons why consumers or businesses do not take on e-commerce or are not very quick to take the opportunities that digital trade present is around the question of security. Now, if you set up a website and I want to pay using my card on your website, how am I sure that my information is secured? How am I sure that the information that I put and my data is safe and is not used by somebody else to hack into my bank account or to hack into my bank details? These are some of the critical things that we need to look at as a group of stakeholders in Sri Lanka to facilitate the diffusion of e-commerce. So when we look at the security assurance, the critical things that the consumer or a business will be looking for is the ability to ensure that the information that they display on the website or that they transmitted has not been altered. So when you set up a website, you must ensure the integrity of the information that you're putting on that website. Now, the second thing is what we call non-repudiation. And here, this means that when you put in information, somebody cannot come and deny that what you put online is not, how do I say it? If they've bought something or you've put in information and you said, oh, my product and my ceramic pot, if you slam it on the floor, it's not going to break. and then someone slams it on the floor and it breaks, and then you say, oh, that was not what we intended. No, it's the ability to ensure, and I'm using that very simplistic example, that the information you put in place cannot be repudiated. We want to be sure that the person we are dealing with online is an authentic person. It's the authenticity of the ability of the identity of the person we're dealing with. We want to ensure confidentiality, and we also want to ensure privacy, that the information that I put on your website is safe and is private, and it will not be used or sold to another person. Okay, I'm going to run again the roles of government. We've talked about government being a promoter of innovation and change. They implement the laws, they monitor the laws, and they put in place. Now, when we looked at the laws and regulation, in reality, the government of Sri Lanka has in place a number of rules and regulations that have an impact on the digital trade. And we did find that there are agencies within Sri Lanka that have been tasked by the government to oversee the digital infrastructure and uptake in the country. So that is a very good thing, and that is something that is commendable. The laws are there, the agencies that are responsible to regulate the activities of the service providers within this space is also available. And I just looked at an example of some of the laws and regulations that we have in place that govern e-commerce in Sri Lanka. We have the Electronic Transactions Act. If you're an MSME and you're not familiar with these laws, please take time to familiarize yourself with them. We have the Computer Crimes Act of 2007. We have the Data Protection and Policy Rules that is being developed, because data is key. Data is critical. The privacy of data is critical. The storage of data is critical. Who owns the ownership of data is critical. I won't go into some of those things now. And then, of course, the Consumer Affairs Authority to ensure that consumers who buy things online are protected from unfair trade practices from the businesses. And again, we have the Intellectual Property Act, which also ensures that your intellectual property as a business is safeguarded in the country. Okay, now we've looked at the major factors of maturity for e-commerce: consumer readiness and maturity, the policies and the laws, logistics and delivery, the business readiness and maturity, and the availability of infrastructure. Now I'm going to go to the results for the next 5 minutes that we found out when we did the report for Sri Lanka. Okay, so when we looked at what we did was to allocate a basic score of between 0 and 1 for each indicator. And then we allocated a weight to the score. So depending on that indicator, we allocated a weight to that indicator and then calculated the weighted score. So when it comes to the proportion of consumers using one, now I'm looking at the results of consumer readiness and maturity. When we come to the proportion of consumers using the mobile, the basic score was 1, because we find that the basic mobile coverage within Sri Lanka is extensive. So the highest the country can score is 1, and the country did score the full 1 in that, meaning that in this instance, mobile coverage is extensive. The weight we allocated to that was 1, the weighted score then was 1. But when we then came to the percentage of consumers using internet, that score went down significantly. So that while we have everybody having a mobile phone, we found out not everybody uses the internet. So on that, between the score of 0 and 1, the country scored 0.3. But the weight that is allocated to that indicator was 3, because having a mobile phone is not enough. It is the usage of internet that carries the weight when we measure consumer readiness. So when we multiply that, the country then scored an 0.9 when it comes to the percentage of consumers using the internet. Again, the consumers using e-payment, a score of 0.2, percentage of consumers purchasing online, a score of 0.1, the percentage of consumers who are aware and skilled in buying things online, a score of 0.2, the total weight is 10, and then the weighted score then became 2.9, which became 0.92. That meant that when it comes to consumer readiness, Sri Lanka is at a level 2. When it comes to business maturity, how ready are the businesses? We looked at the proportion of firms who have adopted IT systems. The country scored 0.4. The weight allocated to that was a 2 because we deemed that important enough. The firms with IT skills, again, this is just an example of, the results that we came up with. I'm going to run through this. And on business readiness, again, the country scored 0.34 when we did the calculated the weighted score, which means that the country is at a level 2. Now, infrastructure and technology. Now, again, we come to the proportion of the people with internet access, again, 0.3. Again, the weight allocated to this is critical. It's a 3 allocated to it, and so the country scored 0.9. Again, the population of people with mobile access there, the percentage of firms who report security, that what their information of the security facilities by the IT providers is safe. The basic score was 0.5, and the weight allocated to that was 3, and so there was a 1.5 score, and then the availability of IT infrastructure. So what we find when it comes to the IT and technology is that the country is at a level 3. The level 3 means that the country is above average. The IT infrastructure is there. The technology is there. The service providers that can facilitate digital trade is above average available in Sri Lanka. And then when we looked at the logistics and delivery, again, we run through the result with all the indicators, we find that the country is at level 2. So while we have some big logistics service providers, we have a number of small logistic providers who are still struggling to find their feet. And we need small mile logistics service companies to be functionally effective for us to see greater diffusion of e-commerce. Now, when it comes to the policy laws and regulations, again, we find in our result that the country is at a level 3 with a score of 0.56. And this means that, again, as with the technology, the basic foundation for the laws, the policies, and the regulations that is necessary for IT, for digital trade and e-commerce is available above average in Sri Lanka. So the IT is available, the laws and policies to drive digital trade by the government is also available. So what we now need to do, when we look at the total score, the consumer readiness score is at a 2. Business readiness is at a 2. Logistics and delivery at a 2. But IT infrastructure and the accessibility of that IT and the policies at a level 3. When we then put all of the weighted score together, we found that the country was at a level 2. Now, the full score is, you could be between a level 1 and a level 5. This tells us that at the end of the day, e-commerce we find is already established in Sri Lanka. There is a lot of e-commerce taking place. The degree of penetration and adaptation is still limited. What we see is that there is considerable potential to expand e-commerce in Sri Lanka, especially to your regional trading partners. Not more than 10% of trade right now is technology driven. The potential remains and it is untapped. And we would like to see more MSMEs get on board in the digital trade landscape. So the basic infrastructure, like I said, for e-commerce is there. It is secured. The firms are reporting that they are happy with the level of security that is provided by the IT companies. It's reliable. There's fast internet. The mobile network is everywhere, even in the remote areas. But internet penetration is low, and internet usage is low, and that is what we need to encourage. So at the end of the day, the full conclusion is that when it comes to e-readiness for Sri Lanka, we need to work on getting the businesses better skilled and enhance the capacity of our businesses through a capacity building process or method. We need to build awareness within the consumers of the opportunities that e-commerce presents and encourage consumers to purchase online. The basic infrastructure is there. There may be a need to increase the infrastructure, but at least what is available is good. The technology is available. The laws and policies are there. Some of them need to be reviewed to be brought into the modern era, but the government agencies are already working on some of this. So that is a good thing. At the end of the day, I think I would conclude to say that opportunities exist. The digital landscape is open, and the opportunities for Sri Lankan MSMEs is huge, especially within the regional market. How can we help the MSMEs to then take advantage of these opportunities is what the role of the government, the chambers, and all the private sector organizations would be. And with that, I come to the end of my presentation so that we can quickly take some questions and have a conversation around what we have shared. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and go back to the live mode. Mr. Indirakit, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Opeyemi. It's very informative, and I know this having this the report, the condensing to this limited time is challenging. But we believe that you have covered almost all aspects, important aspects of the matters in the report. So the participants can download the full report of the readiness assessment. We published in the website, and we have shared the web link in our chat. So so having the explanation in points in detail, that we are trying to step into the questions. There are a number of questions we received. Opeyemi, I like to forward you the first question. It is in relation with the current situation in the world. The question is impact of COVID-19 on the global e-commerce market, new challenges and opportunities for MSMEs in Sri Lanka. So can you elaborate on this?
Thank you, Mr. Indirakit. To bring it to the reality where we are now, COVID is something that none of us prepared for. As a matter of fact, I was in Colombo in March, a few days just before the government locked down the country. So I only managed to get back into London very quickly and then met the lockdown. And since then, I haven't been back in my office. But this is our new reality. I'm having this webinar from my house. It's the new reality that we all have to deal with. Now, what is the impact of the COVID on MSMEs? First of all, if you look at all the forecasts by the World Bank, the IMF, the OECD, the general agreement is that global world trade is going on a nose down. Economic development across the world is going on a nosedive. And we are actually almost hoping that we do not precipitate another crisis like we had in 2008, because the world is still reeling from the economic crisis of 2008. Now we've added COVID to it. Now, what we've seen with COVID is that instantly a number of countries started to lock their borders. You would find that countries where all of a sudden the issues of food security became more critical, access to medicine became very difficult because countries started to place a ban on the sale of grains or the sale of medicines or the sale of PPEs. And you saw countries immediately implementing protectionist policies in the light of the COVID. What then happened with MSMEs? It so happened that if you were a traditional MSME and all of your business was done in your office, you only sold to people who came to your store, and your store is locked down for 3 months, you are in crisis. If you only provide services to the people that you can see, then your company is going to go down. You know, I like what Jack Ma said, even though it was on the CEO of Alibaba. He said in 2020, if you survive, if you are alive at the end of 2020, that in itself is survival. The reality is that only companies that we saw that thrived during this COVID pandemic were the digital companies, were the e-commerce platforms. So while everybody else in the world was in trouble, Amazon was posting exponential profits. eBay, Alibaba, all of those people whose businesses did not rely on a physical or whose businesses or whose goods and products could be bought online, they thrived in spite of the pandemic. So the reality is that for MSMEs, this is another wake-up call, that we must start to diversify the way that we do business. We must start to diffuse technology. We must start to innovate. We must start to change our business partners. Our business patterns. And we must start to look at, maybe you think of the cost of going into the digital trade platforms, or putting your goods on Amazon, or putting your goods on eBay, or all of the other e-commerce websites that are available in Sri Lanka. But I dare say that at the end of the day, that cost will be well worth it if what is at stake is the survival of your company. So COVID has come to stay. The world is still reeling from it. We do not yet know the total extent of the impact of this pandemic, but what we do know is that it would take us innovating in our business processes to survive in the next few years in spite of this pandemic as an MSME.
Thanks, Opeyemi. The second question, it is an ordinary but common, and anyway, this is what are the assistance provided from Commonwealth Secretariat to capacity building of MSMEs?
Let me just say, I'm going to say two things here. What can the Commonwealth Secretariat do? There are two things we can do. Let me start with what the EDB can do, because the EDB is the natural partner for you as an MSME in Sri Lanka. I know many of you are already familiar with the EDB, and that is why you are probably on this webinar. They are your first line of support. I would encourage you. I used to work something that was not in my profile, which I then thought about. I'm like, oh, that wasn't in my profile. I worked with my government in an export promotion council, similar to the EDB, for 10 years of my career. So I once sat where you sat, Mr. Indrikrit, as a staff of an export promotion council, where we also offer support. So I know the value that an export promotion organization or trade facilitation organization like the EDB can offer to you as an SME. So challenge them, meet them, ask them questions. They would be able to answer your questions. What the Secretariat can do, on the Secretariat part, we are also working with the EDB. When we did this e-readiness assessment, one of the things we found was that women entrepreneurs were more disproportionately affected or had less access to the infrastructure to promote digital trade. Many of the women-owned entrepreneurs did not have websites. Many of them did not know how to go about listing their products on established websites. So we put in place, we developed a training manual for women entrepreneurs. And I'm sorry, men, but this is only focused on our women entrepreneurs. And we actually deployed the first of that training in Colombo this year in March, where we had 25 MSMEs in attendance, and we were looking at it was a digital bootcamp on how they can set up their own website, what they need to do, how they need to set up the business model, what they need to do with the kind of pictures, how they need to put in the product information. So we deployed that training in Colombo in March, and we trained 25 SMEs. We still have a phase 2 of that training, but I understand that the phase 2 would not take place in Colombo. It would take place in another region in Sri Lanka. So once COVID is over, we would again be working with EDB to offer that training to interested women entrepreneurs who are looking for how to expand their market in the digital trade. Then the third thing I would say is that we have an intra-Commonwealth SME association. Now, the intra-Commonwealth SME association is an association for SMEs across the Commonwealth. If you are a part of that association, you would be connected to SMEs from India, from the UK, from Australia, from the Pacific, from the Caribbean. We've had 3 trade summits in the last 3 years. It's a new project. We've done the first summit in India. We've done a second summit in Kenya last year. We've done a summit in Australia, in the Gold Coast. So the next trade summit for the Intra-Commonwealth SME Association is going to be in Barbados. If you're interested as an entrepreneur, it's free to join. It don't cost you anything, frankly, because it's a Commonwealth initiative. So if you're interested in being a part of that Intra-Commonwealth SME Association, send an email to Mr. Indrakit and the EDB. I can put you on to the people who are leading the association. Again, frankly, it's free to join. It has no cost. You can only gain from being able to network with SMEs from across the Commonwealth and share your experiences and also learn from them, and maybe even create business linkages. When we did the summit in India, I remember that an entrepreneur from Ghana, a young entrepreneur, actually signed a business deal with one of the Indian companies on the spot that was worth some good millions of dollars. And it was such a fantastic opportunity for that young entrepreneur from Ghana. So do send us your invite. We'll put you in touch with the association, and you can take it from there.
Thank you, Opeyemi, that the elaboration of the works that we are doing as well with all the international organizations to support SMEs and micro level enterprises, not only with ComSec, but ITC, Geneva, and UNIDO, all the EDB has programs to support and facilitate SME sector. And okay, the third question, it is, I like to get it from the chat. The one Miss Sonali Jayasuriya is, she's asking how effectively use e-commerce portals to increase our marketing activities, especially situation like this, especially in rubber products like solid tires.
Okay, so that's the question, how to use e-commerce portals. I would say, I know that in one of the challenges, and I, as of the time we were doing this report, I'm not sure if that has been rectified. So if there's anybody who has better information than me on this, please put it in the chat, because I do not claim to have all knowledge. One of the challenges that we identified when we were doing this report was that PayPal was still not available in Sri Lanka. And this is some of the challenges that was identified. The challenge of the interbank challenges, and the use of denominating your product either in dollars or then using the Sri Lankan currency, and the implication of the currency exchange for you. So if you are thinking of how to use the portals, I know if Amazon is, you can list your product on Amazon, you can list your product on eBay, and you can list your product on Alibaba. Now, Alibaba, when you're talking about things like solid tires or rubber, now, rubber products are more an intermediate product. They are not, maybe they are not sold to, except you're selling the tires in the completed form, that is when you're selling them to end users, okay? So if you're selling them to end users, then maybe Alibaba would not be for you. You have to go to a business to consumer portal like Amazon or eBay or GloCart and all of the other ones that are out there. If your target are businesses, then your best bet is to list your product on platforms such as Alibaba and maybe even Amazon. I don't know how much eBay is effective in Sri Lanka. I know the report looked at some of the websites that are popular. There are some local websites in market portals, platforms within Colombo itself. But if you want that extra rate outside of Sri Lanka, then using the posting your product on the international trade portals, marketplaces will be a much better bet for you, depending on who your target market is. So if it is consumers, then you know what platforms you can use. And if it is, if the end users are, if it's an intermediate good, so that your end users are car manufacturing companies or bicycle manufacturing companies and those kind of companies, then you know that your market target market audience would be businesses and not necessarily end-use consumers.
Thank you, Opeyemi. This may be the last question. This is on the information. Can ComSec recommend or mention the reliable source of to obtain information on global trends or e-government policies towards digitalized development in SME sector?
So you're looking for where to find information.
Yeah.
A lot of information, data, and other kind of digital information are on the, I would first recommend the ITC portals. And anybody can have access to the ITC portals. So your trademark and your product map, those two portals contain information about market trends. And this will be useful for you if you want to look at, if you want market access information, you want to know which countries are buying what products, and you want to be able to target your marketing for a particular region. So I would recommend the ICT portals, trade map, market access, or the market, the product map. I would also recommend there's a lot of data on the World Bank WIBS information system. There's a lot of information that's loaded in there. You can also find information about digital trade there. OECD also has a good data set that you can also look at. These top three, and then of course, almost always UNCTAD. UNCTAD has a lot of information that is again focused on developing countries and the market opportunities or the trends in market development in developing countries in particular. So UNCTAD also has a lot of information that you can access. So the World Bank, the ITC, UNCTAD, and the OECD will be good places to get data from if that's what you're interested in.
Thanks, Opeyemi. It is time to conclude our webinar for today. Really, I appreciate on behalf of the EDB, Export Development Board, for your untiring effort to educate our participants today on with a very informative and interesting presentation on this e-commerce readiness. And we have understood where we are and how much we have to go that we move forward to achieve the better results and to achieve the level you recommended us to go. And the ComSec, we have to thank your support to do this, the e-commerce readiness assessment report. It is a very informative and very important, useful report for our country and all our citizens in the country who are willing to, step into the area of e-commerce. And they can understand, really this is available now, they can read from our, download and read from our website. PDF format is available. So giving that message and thank you again and the ComSec for supporting us for the valuable service to complete this readiness study and the report. And again, thank you very much. And we, for today, this is the time to conclude. And we hope to meet all the participants with another webinar the next week, Thursday, but at 2 o'clock. So thank you very much all.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for having me, Mr. Indrakit, and thank you, participants, and I hope that you've learned something from this webinar, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Wish you all the best. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.